As Frodo was borne towards them, the great pillars rose like towers to meet them. Giants they seemed to him, vast gray figures, silent but threatening. Then he saw that they were indeed shaped and fashioned. The craft and power of old had wrought upon them, and still they preserved through the suns and rains of forgotten years the mighty likenesses in which they had been hewn. Upon great pedestals, founded in the deep waters, stood two great kings of stone. Still with blurred eyes and crannied brows, they frowned upon the north. Hello everybody, welcome to Aude and Tulva, where we are walking our way through Tolkien's Legendarium. Today we are finishing up Chapter 9 of Book 2, The Great River. Don't forget, like and subscribe. Linked in the description are some of my favorite book versions at different price points, and memberships are open as well if you'd like to support the channel that way. All right, let's dive in. We start the second half of the chapter with Gimli professing his love for two things. "Praised be the bow of Galadriel, Nehend, and eye of Legolas," said Gimli as he munched a wafer of lembas. "That was a mighty shot in the dark, my friend." "But who can say what it hit?" said Legolas. "I cannot," said Gimli, "but I am glad that the shadow came no nearer. I liked it not at all. Too much it reminded me of the shadow in Moria. The shadow of the Balrog," he ended in a whisper. It's interesting that Gimli first mentions the bow of Galadriel and then mentions Legolas. Does he think the shot would not have been as good or had such an effect if it wasn't for the bow of the Galathrim? And did Galadriel really even do anything with the bow except hand it to Legolas? Hopefully Legolas won't carry an offense, more than a few minutes. But Gimli's second statement really made me think. So we know that the shadow that came towards them was a Nazgul. Gimli said it reminded him of the Balrog. So here's a question for you. Did Sauron succeed in morphing mortal men into beings that could actually rival Maya in power and presence? Now, I know some of you will immediately say, well, Gandalf had a hard time with the Witch King. Of course Sauron succeeded. Sure, but Gandalf was also forbidden from using his power overtly where mortals could see him. And the Balrog was under no such order. I'm inclined to believe that this is just Gimli feeling the fear aura from the Nazgul, since he was probably inundated throughout his whole life with stories of how the Bane of Durin killed all his folk. He has a big fear of the Balrog, though I do think it's a very different type of fear. That's probably something we'll get into later when we meet the Nazgul again in their final forms. As we finish praising the bow of Galadriel and Aragorn telling everyone to keep weapons close at hand, we get the beginning of a nice kind of philosophical conversation, all started by, of all people, Sam. Sam sat tapping the hilt of his sword as if he were counting on his fingers and looking up at the sky. "It's very strange," he murmured. "The moon's the same in the Shire and in the Wilderland, or it ought to be, but either it's out of its running or I'm all wrong in my reckoning. You'll remember, Mr. Frodo, the moon was waning as we lay on the flat up in that tree, a week from full, I reckon. And we'd been a week on the way last night when up pops a new moon as thin as a nail paring, as if we had never stayed no time in the Elvish country. Well, I can remember 3 nights there for certain, and I seem to remember several more, but I would take my oath it was never a whole month. Anyone would think that time did not count in there." I'll break this up a bit since it's a relatively long section, but here we really see Tolkien making sure to keep his timeline straight. And he does it with the moon throughout the entire book. And this is how his way of telling us that they were in Lorien for a full month. The Tale of Years in Appendix B tells us they arrive in Lorien on January 17th and they leave on February 16th. But why is Sam having such a hard time remembering all the days they were there? Was it the grief he felt because of losing Gandalf? I know it can be really difficult to know how many days have passed when you lose somebody. Well, Frodo here kind of gives us his opinion. "And perhaps that was the way of it," said Frodo. "In that land, maybe, we were in a time that has elsewhere long gone by. It was not, I think, until Silverlode bore us back to Anduin that we returned to the time that flows through mortal lands to the Great Sea. And I don't remember any moon, either new or old, in Caris Galathan. Only stars by night and sun by day." Now, I really like Frodo's suggestion. Even though it's kind of crazy, he basically suggests that time has actually slowed down in Lorien. While the world moved on around the first, Lorien was in a stasis and time did not pass there. For example, maybe an hour in the world outside only felt like a second while in the borders of Lorien. I doubt Frodo thought it through that hard, but he takes a shot at why he and Sam both have a hard time remembering their full time there. And when you're in that type of civilization that utilizes the moon in such a way, it can really mess up your timing when you never see the moon, like Frodo was saying. But overhearing their conversation, Legolas needs to chime in. Legolas stirred in his boat. "Nay, time does not tarry ever," he said, "but change and growth is not in all things and places alike. For the elves the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow. Swift because they themselves change little and all else fleets by. It is a grief to them. Slow because they need not count the running years, not for themselves. The passing seasons are but ripples ever repeated in a long, long stream. Yet beneath the sun, all things must wear to an end at last. So maybe it's an answer and maybe it's not. I don't have a great breakdown of what Legolas is saying here. If you have one, let me know in the comments. Love to hear your, like if you have an article you love or a video, or if you have some thoughts, it would be super cool. But Legolas does, like he starts with saying time is ever as it was in Lorien. So with that, we can say it didn't slow down, but it really is probably simply a perception issue. The company, at least, the non-elves, felt time move as the elves do. Time moves swiftly past them because they are serially longeval. So what I'm getting from his explanation is the rest of the company was inside a bubble of power that let them experience the passage of time the same way an elf would. What felt like a week was truly a month. But philosophical discussions about the passage of time aside, there are important things to discuss, like where are they actually going to go from here? I do not see why we should pass the rapids or follow the river any further, said Boromir. If the Aemon wheel lie before us, then we can abandon these cockle boats and strike westward and southward until we come to the Edwash and cross into my own land. We can if we are making for Minas Tirith, said Aragorn, but that is not yet agreed, and such a course may be more perilous than it sounds. The Vale of Entwash is flat and fenny, and fog is a deadly peril there for those on foot and laden. I would not abandon our boats until we must. The river is at least a path that cannot be missed. But the enemy holds the eastern bank, objected Boromir. And even if you pass the gates of Argonath and you come unmolested to the Tindrak, what will you do then? Leap down the falls and land in the marshes? No, answered Aragorn, say rather that we will bear our boats by the ancient way to Raura's Foot and there take to the water again. Do you not know, Boromir, or do you choose to forget the North Stair and the high seat upon Aemon Hen that were made in the days of the great kings? I at least have a mind to stand in that high place again before I decide my further course. There maybe we shall see some sign that will guide us. So it's clear that Aragorn and Boromir do not agree on what their path should be moving forward. Boromir is still pushing the company going to Minas Tirith. While this seems like it's just a continuance of what he always thought should happen, it's subtly different. Remember, Boromir, like Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn, were with the company partly because they were just going in that direction. Boromir was with the company until he decided to head back home. Aragorn always planned on heading to Minas Tirith to claim his kingship back. But it always seemed to me like Boromir was totally cool with no one else going with him if they didn't want to. He would just head off when he needed to. But now he's pushing for the whole company to go with him, and he brings up good points too. The enemy holds the eastern shore, so they would be sitting ducks in the boats. It's not really unreasonable, everything he's saying, except that now that Gandalf is gone, Aragorn has leadership of the company foisted upon him, and he has more cares than just claiming his kingship. But he's clear with his reasoning why they shouldn't just head back to Minas Tirith. It's easy to get lost in the marshes and fens. The river is an easy path and you can't miss it. It's all, very reasonable. But what he's doing is trying to buy himself more time. He knows, everybody knows, that Frodo needs to get to Mordor and destroy the ring. But he wants to go to Minas Tirith and reclaim his crown. I think he's hoping to postpone the decision as long as possible in the hopes that something happens that will rid him of the obligation of helping Frodo to destroy the ring. And when we look at the part he played in helping Frodo in Return of the King, maybe fate is playing a part here. We know what's going to happen in the next chapter. Is Eru kind of tipping the scales? Generally yes, but in this particular situation, hard maybe. He also wants to get to Aemon Hen to see if he can get more information so he can make the best decision. What will that do for him? Well, Aemon Hen means Hill of Seeing. It's a high place and it's possible there is some, we'll call it magic, there that Aragorn, being a descendant of Numenor, could tap into. We know Frodo seems to see more than he should while up there in the next chapter, so Aragorn is probably hoping to do the same. He never did get to look into the Mirror of Galadriel to parse its visions, did he? No. So, yeah, sure. So their next course of action is to get around the rapids. Aragorn lets us know where the men of Gondor passed by on occasion and made a portage way around the rapids, and he goes with Legolas to see if they could find him. Peril lies ahead on every southward road, answered Aragorn. Wait for us one day. If we do not return in that time, you will know that evil has indeed befallen us. Then you must take a new leader and follow him as best you can. And this is kind of a fascinating thing to hear from Aragorn. He knows he's the de facto leader right now, but he's also probably the best person to try and find the path around the rapids as he's actually traveled here before. at least more than anyone else in the company. But at this point, with all the pushback he's getting from Boromir, is it really the best decision for him to put himself in, the best spot for him to put himself in? Who would the new leader of the company be if they all had to choose? We know that 3 younger hobbits would all defer to Frodo, but would Legolas and Gimli follow him as well as the actual leader of the company? Boromir, no, he wouldn't do it. Would Boromir try to force them all to go to Minas Tirith at that point? Knowledge of the next chapter notwithstanding anyway, I feel like Aragorn could have just let Legolas and maybe Boromir go and it would have been fine. They probably would have found the path and Aragorn wouldn't be putting the company in danger of Boromir being able to take advantage of the tiny little hobbits. But those fears are unfounded and Aragorn and Legolas come back having found the path. Now this part is probably something most people skip over, but I actually kind of really like it. The task proved hard indeed, and yet in the end, it was done. The goods were taken out of the boats and brought to the top of the bank, where there was a level space. Then the boats were drawn out of the water and carried up. They were far less heavy than any had expected. Of what tree growing in the Elvish country they were made of, not even Legolas knew. But the wood was tough and yet strangely light. Merry and Pippin alone could carry their boat with ease along the flat. I don't know if you've ever done any canoeing, but canoes aren't very light. Since they were comfortable enough, for men the size of Boromir and Aragorn, it's safe to assume they were pretty close to, normal canoe size. Maybe just a little shallower, I don't know. But if Merry and Pippin could carry one easily together, that's actually really impressive. I mean, Aragorn and Boromir did need to lift the boats to get over the rough country, but I still wish I'd had canoes that light when I was doing my canoeing. I hate moving those things around, especially you have to turn them upside down to get them into the trailer. It's obnoxious just to. Now the company must travel by day for their final little trek on the river before they get to the Falls of Rauris. Then they approach the Argonath. Frodo, peering forward, saw in the distance 2 great rocks approaching. Like great pinnacles or pillars of stone they seemed. Tall and sheer and ominous they stood upon either side of the stream. A narrow gap appeared between them, and the river swept the boats towards it. "Behold the Argonath, the pillars of the kings," cried Aragorn. "We shall pass them soon. Keep the boats in line, and as far apart as you can, hold the middle of the stream." So before jumping into the next paragraph, a quick pause, couple things. One, Aragorn seems pretty stoked to be here. That was always the impression I got by his initial cry. Second, I'm not sure why, but I find this really important to talk about. Why do they all need to hold to the middle and keep the boats far apart? We'll see a better description of this in the next paragraph, but the river kind of narrows into a small gorge before emptying into a massive lake. I'm not great at physics, but if you take the same volume of water, per minute passing by, and suddenly pass it through a smaller outlet, it's gonna run faster. So they need to keep to the middle of the stream because they'll get smashed into the cliffs with the water having to shift to the smaller route. And they need to stay further apart because they won't have as much time to react to movements or obstacles in the river as when they're moving slowly. That's all. Anyway, back to Tolkien's beautiful prose. As Frodo was borne towards them, the great pillars rose like towers to meet them. Giants they seemed to him, vast gray figures, silent but threatening. Then he saw that they were indeed shaped and fashioned. The craft and power of old had wrought upon them, and still they preserved through the suns and rains of forgotten years the mighty likenesses in which they had been hewn. Upon great pedestals, founded in the deep waters, stood 2 great kings of stone. Still with blurred eyes and crannied brows, they frowned upon the north. The left hand of each was raised, palm outwards, in gesture of warning. In each right hand there was an axe. Upon each head there was a crumbling helm and crown. Great power and majesty they still wore, the silent wardens of a long-vanished kingdom. Awe and fear fell upon Frodo, and he cowered down, shutting his eyes and not daring to look up as the boat drew near. Even Boromir bowed his head as the boats whirled by, frail and fleeting as little leaves under the enduring shadow of the sentinels of Numenor. So they passed into the dark chasm of the gates. Sheer rose the dreadful cliffs to unguessed heights on either side. Far off was the dim sky. The black waters roared and echoed, and a wind screamed over them. Frodo, crouching over his knees, heard Sam in front muttering and groaning. "Oh, what a place, what a horrible place. Just let me out. Just let me get out of this boat and I'll never wet my toes in a puddle again, let alone a river." Here we have the Argonath, 2 massive statues of Anarion and Isildur, the sons of Elendil, rulers of the southern kingdom of Gondor. Tolkien paints such an amazing picture in my mind here. It's almost like the statue Frodo and Sam come across in Ithilien with just a head attached, minus the orc graffiti. If we look in Appendix A, we're told it was King Remendekil who had them built. Hammond and Skull say he reigned from 1304 to 1366, but the appendix talks about Remendikil doing things in 1248 and 1250. I don't know, not exactly sure about those dates, but it mentioned that Remendikil was fighting with Northmen who would often side with the Easterlings against Gondor. Tolkien says the figures frowned upon the North and their hands raised in a gesture of warning. We can see why. Remendikil had the Argonath built to warn and remind the Northmen who fought against them that they could not defeat Gondor. It's a reminder that if they raise their hand against Gondor again, the same will happen to them, while at the same time reminding them of the ancestors of the kings of Gondor, Isildur and Anarion, sons of the man who killed Sauron. Isildur, the man who cut the ring off Sauron's finger. These are extremely powerful men, and their line retains some of that power. And such a warning it is that Frodo and Sam are afraid. They're not even bad guys. Boromir even bows his head, but most likely out of simple reverence. But you have to think there's some power left in these carvings and some power put into them when they were first built, I guess. This was such a warning against those who were not Gondorian coming into the kingdom without the knowledge or approval of the king, that even Frodo and Sam, who were with Aragorn, the rightful king, and Boromir, the son of the ruling steward, were still bowed down with fear. But Aragorn reminds them who they're with. "Fear not," said a strange voice behind him. Frodo turned and saw Strider, and yet not Strider, for the weather-worn ranger was no longer there. In the stern sat Aragorn, son of Arathorn, proud and erect, guiding the boat with skillful strokes. His hood was cast back and his dark hair was blowing in the wind. A light was in his eyes, a king returning from exile to his own land. "Fear not," he said, "long have I desired to look upon the likenesses of Isildur and Anarion, my sires of old. Under their shadow, Elisar, the Elfstone, son of Arathorn of the house of Valandil, Isildur's son, heir of Elendil, has naught to dread." I love this part. The worn Strider the Ranger turned into Aragorn the King. He's coming into his kingdom and he has nothing to fear. But this is the kind of a divisive part, or at least brings up a divisive conversation that started about, 20 years ago with the Jackson movies. In the movies, he's like the reluctant king, which I guess some people really love. But here he takes to his lineage, to his kingship, like a duck to water, which some people love, but some people also really hate it. They don't want him to want to be king. He needs to be the reluctant king. He can't want it. Personally, I don't get the hate for the way Tolkien portrays Aragorn in the book. He's a man on a mission. He knows what his purpose is. But the next paragraph brings up some really interesting things also. Then the light of his eyes faded, and he spoke to himself. "Would that Gandalf were here. How my heart yearns for Minas Anor and the walls of my own city. But whither now shall I go?" So Aragorn is clearly torn here. He knows what the ultimate goal of the company was, and still is. He knows the leadership is now on his shoulders alone since Gandalf died. But we see he yearns for Minas Anor, the original name of Minas Tirith, his city. He still doesn't know what direction he's gonna go. And Hammond and Skull bring up a really interesting point here. It's what they do. About this paragraph, they say, "Only rarely does Tolkien let us see into Aragorn's mind. He does so here perhaps to stress the difficult choice that Aragorn is facing." And here I have to 100% agree. But the part I want to focus on the fact Tolkien doesn't let us into Aragorn's mind very often. Why is that? So the whole premise of this book and The Hobbit is that it's written by hobbits, Bilbo, Frodo, and Sam. Minor editing by Finnegan. So it stands to reason we wouldn't know much about what's going on in Aragorn's mind. And if we look back, and other times we hear what Frodo's thinking, it's when Frodo overhears Aragorn's conversation with Gandalf. We're never getting a narration from Aragorn's point of view. Michael Drought calls this the epistemic regime. It's about how the narrator knows what they know and why they believe what they believe. And Tolkien does this so well. He's almost always using the point of view of the least knowledgeable person in the party at the time. The times when the whole company is together, it could be argued that Merry or Pippin are the least knowledgeable of the group, but the point of view is at least from a hobbit's point of view, neither Aragorn nor Gandalf or Boromir, whatever. And it works super, super well. It's why we always get to hear the questions asked and the smarter people explain everything. That way we know what's going on. This plays into the textual ruins as well. They drop little bits of information like the cats of Queen Beruthiel, and we now know there's a history there, even if we don't know that history. That satisfies the person whose point of view we're in, and we can often just take that satisfaction kind of into ourselves and just kind of keep reading, perfectly mollified. And I just love how Tolkien brings you in and makes you feel comfortable. As the company floats along the lake, Nan Hithawel, Aragorn provides some more context of the ancient Gondorian kingdom. "Behold, Tol Brandir," said Aragorn, pointing south to the tall peak. "Upon the left stands Amon Law, and upon the right is Amon Hen, the hills of hearing and of sight. In the days of the great kings, there were high seats upon them, and watch was kept there. But it is said that no foot of man or beast has ever been set upon Tol Brandir. Ere the shade of night falls, we shall come to them. I hear the endless voice of rowers calling." So we'll get a close-up view of Amon Hen in the next chapter, but Aragorn gives us a little preview of what we're going to see. Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight, or more directly translated, Hill of the Eye. Amon Law, the Hill of Hearing, or the Hill of the Ear. High places where watch was kept. But when we think about the power, that's in the Argonath, I think it kind of stands to reason there would be some power built into those high seats as well. And again, in the next chapter, with what happens with Frodo, it's easy to kind of see what the power is. Amon Hen allows those atop the hill to see further and kind of know what's happening around them. My headcanon, it's kind of like the Palantir, but on a less weird scale, I guess you could say. Amon Law, which we will not get to see as close, I think would be the same thing, but maybe more geared towards sound, thus the name, Hill of Hearing. I'm not totally sure how that would work though. Maybe if an army was really good at camouflage, the watchmen of the hill would be able to hear the rumor of their coming. Not really sure, but that's, I guess, what I'm gonna go with. And as we come under the shadow of those hills, we come to the end of the chapter. The 10th day of their journey was over. Wilderland was behind them. They could go no further without choice between the Eastway and the West. The last stage of the quest was before them. Aragorn can't put off his choice any longer. He must choose now between Frodo and Boromir, Mordor and Gondor. Will he choose to accompany the Ringbearer to fulfill his charge, put on him by the council, or will Aragorn go to Minas Tirith to see the city of his sires? We definitely have no idea what's going to happen here. I mean, unless you've read the book or seen the movies, I guess. But that wraps up chapter 9, The Great River. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Channel memberships are open as well. And until next time, always remember, Aure and Tulava, day shall come again.